Hi, I'm Kevin Rogers, and you're listening to our second episode of Sidewalk, Skyline. Within our first week, we've already reached over 260 subscribers on our RSS feeds. That tells me we should probably keep moving forward, telling these stories about God at work in the city core of Canadian cities. You may be listening because you too have a big heart for Canada, and you're just a little bit curious about how we can make a difference. Why don't you subscribe and journey with us across Canada? We're available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, and our website, sidewalkskylinepodcast.com. Some of our episodes will be interviews with fascinating people, and some shows, like the one we're doing here today, will feature relevant content to help us all understand more about urban life in Canada. If you haven't heard the first episode, we talked with Roger Fordham of Feeding Windsor. You might want to go back and check that episode out. In that interview, one of the things he shared was how food opened the doors for us to go into low-income, high-rise properties to provide hospitality and food security for people living in tough places. We can all point to low-income, high-rises in our cities that struggle with multi-level problems, gang and drug activity, mental health issues, food insecurity, pest control, and the list goes on and on and on. But how about the other high-rise buildings that people choose to live in? Have you ever lived or stayed in a downtown condo in a major city? In my travels, I usually prefer, when I can, to book an Airbnb over a hotel chain. More than once, I've stayed downtown in a condo, and I've caught glimpses of what that kind of urban life may be like. Some people think that would be wonderful. Others say, no way, Jose. Well, if you do live in a condo, you're not alone. It's become a desirable domicile for many. In 2017, CBC's reporter Pete Evans wrote an article on Canadians living in condos, and I want to read some key points for us to consider. Statistics Canada says almost 1.9 million Canadian households were living in condominiums in 2016. Among that group, just over two-thirds were owners, while 616,570 Canadians rented them. As is to be expected, there's a wide variety across the country when it comes to the popularity of condos as a choice of places to live. In Vancouver, for example, more than 30% of the population live in condos, the highest percentage in Canada by far. Condos are home to 21.8% of Calgarians, followed by Abbotsford, Mission, Kelowna, and Toronto, all of which have more than 1 out of every 5 households living in a condominium. In other cities, meanwhile, condos barely rate as a living option. In Greater Sudbury, Ontario, St. John, Thunder Bay, St. John's, Peterborough, and Belleville, less than 1 out of every 20 people live in a condo. Well, on today's episode, we're going to hear from Darryl Dash, a pastor who has planted a church in Toronto's Liberty Village. It's a neighborhood that at one time was industrial and institutional, but has been transformed into a residential neighborhood, primarily with condo developments. So he's planted Liberty Grace Church. It's a young fellowship evangelical Baptist church. They're in a neighborhood where most people that live there can go through their secure entry, hop on an elevator, and disappear into their home, into their unit, without really needing to encounter their neighbors in any significant way. So how do you crack the community code and make a lasting impact in a place that the average person might live in for just a couple years? Our session today is a workshop that Darryl Dash gave at the Our City Toronto conference back in September 2019. This was an urban practitioner event, and some incredible people from the GTA were sharing their stories and their insights. The event was hosted at Stone Church. Well, down the road, we're going to feature a few more episodes that came out of that conference. But without any further ado, I think we should get to our episode for today. Let's listen to Darryl's workshop and hear about Condo Church in Liberty Village.
So I want to tell you a little bit about my story, and then this can be interactive, so you can at any time interrupt or heckle. I expect as much from Trevor here, so that's okay. And so a long time ago in a previous life, I grew up in Brampton, as I said, and I went to school in Scarborough. But one day, I heard of a church called Runnymede, at the time Baptist Church, now Runnymede Community Church, and they were looking for a student pastor. And this was actually one of the most transforming moments of my life. I still remember it. I went to the community to kind of scope it out, came up the subway at Bloor and Runnymede, and walked out of the subway, and something changed. That was like the moment where I think I'm called to Toronto. And I don't know what it was. I think actually we'll get into what it was. I think it was, for me growing up, the city was always a place of, my granddad called it the concrete jungle. So I always thought of it as being a place, a very impersonal place. That was the first time that I walked in and I saw Toronto as a city of neighborhoods. And does anybody know you know the Runnymede area. Anybody know where the Bloor Runnymede area?
I know.
Yeah. I walked out and I actually spent a little bit of ministry time there. But that was at the moment where I was like, this is it. This is where I think God is calling me to be in an urban place, right on the subway. That's not downtown Toronto, but that's still like very much urban Toronto. And so I filed that away. In school, I also had a couple of, especially one guy, and I got to know him a little bit, and he pastored, do you know Barry Duguid? He pastored, I think he's pastored now 3 churches in Toronto, and then a number of churches where he served as interim. And he said, he challenged a lot of us students, consider making a lifetime commitment to Toronto. Consider making, like, this is your place. And of course, God can change that. You want to follow God's call. But consider if God might be calling you to say, this is where I'm going to devote my life. These are going to be my people. So anyway, all of that was like, this was all going on. I was like, this is it. I didn't know this existed. I didn't know that there were neighborhoods within a city. And I didn't know that there was this vibrancy of community within a place like Toronto, down like right on the subway line. So then, I graduated from seminary. I think I was 23. I know I was 23. A church called me to be their pastor. And it was right across the Humber River from Bloor and Runnymede area. So you could tell, like, this church was interested. By the way, if you ever have the say, don't call a 23-year-old as your pastor. Let's throw that in there. Don't do that. Stupid move. But I went there and I thought, this is cool because it's almost, it's within a short drive of there. It was a world apart. So just crossing the Humber River, I don't know what happens. It's interesting, but things changed. And that was very much Etobicoke. And as opposed to Bloor and Runnymede, when I lived there, I walked everywhere. If you had a car, you still walked everywhere. I crossed the Humber River, and I was literally a 5-minute walk away from the church I was pastoring. So I was very much like incarnational ministry, moving to the neighborhood. I still remember every time we went to the church, almost always, we drove to the church. And now I shake my head like, what were we thinking? But you drove everywhere. There were no sidewalks, very few sidewalks. It was really a place where you drove to the supermarket, as opposed to Bloor and Runnymede, where you would walk every day. Nobody shopped for the week. You went down every day and bought fresh vegetables from the vegetable market and went to the butcher. So just a world apart. And I spent 20 years, so 7 years at Park Lawn and Queensway in kind of like mild suburbia. And then I still remember the day where I was called to a church called Richview, which is Eglinton and Kipling, which is close to the airport. And I crossed that threshold. We never moved our house, but I crossed that threshold from mildly suburban to totally suburban. So that whole area, central Etobicoke, is just so different. And it's changing now. It's becoming more multicultural. But it was like everybody, I went to a church there, everybody drove to that church. Nobody walked. I don't think anybody walked to the church. Its vision was to be kind of a regional church that offered all the programs anybody could want. And I remember thinking, people would ask, are you going to move into the community? And I always said, it doesn't matter. Like, it's a suburban, big box church, or wannabe. Like, nobody actually cares if you're even part of the neighborhood, or, to be honest, they don't really care. Like, the criteria isn't that you even reach the neighborhood. And B, I hated that neighborhood. I spent 13 years in a neighborhood pastoring in a church where I really didn't like the neighborhood. And if you ask me why, I would say to this day, because there wasn't a lot to love about the neighborhood. Like, there was no... I went to exegete the community there, and you try to figure out what holds the community together. Where is the center of the community? Like, where do people gather? Where does the community come together? Where is the shared sense of belonging to this community? After 13 years there, I couldn't answer that question. There was no community hub. There was no place where people gathered. There was no sense of community identity. And I'm telling you a story. They'll get into, like, I hope this is interesting. If you can start yawning if it isn't. I began to really, every time I went to downtown Toronto, my heart came alive. And so I began to, like, I'm not a genius, but I kind of figured every time I'm in Etobicoke, part of my soul dies. And I apologize if you live in Etobicoke. But it's like, it's almost like something in me is slowly withering away.
I feel you, brother.
Thank you.
Amen.
And every time I came to downtown Toronto, it would be this place that I was raised to hate. Like everything was like, I live in a condo now. My mother was like, oh, I don't understand how anybody lives in a condo. It's just a little shoebox in the sky and like concrete jungle. There's no tree. Like every time I came downtown, it was like, I love this. I felt the energy. I love the people. And so one day, when I was at Richview, I began to read Tim Keller on the City, an article that he wrote, A New Kind of Urban Christian, which is the first time that basically he says more Christians need to move into the city. They need to learn to be good neighbors. Instead of fleeing the city, Christians are generally like, oh, the city's evil. We need to flee the city. They need to move into the city. They need to love the city. And so that was like, oh man. And I began to read, actually it was a lot of Tim Keller. And he made a case. I always thought that church planting was for weird people. And since then I've learned he actually is kind of for weird people. So I was describing like people who can't, I used to think church planters were people who couldn't fit in the traditional church. And they were a little bit deviant, so that's why they planted churches. And I was talking about that once. And a church planter raised his hand and said, that's kind of right. Like, there's an element of truth there. But I began to say, like, oh man, we have so many churches in Etobicoke and North York and Scarborough, at least in our denomination. I couldn't think of very many churches. Actually, I mapped them. I went on Google Maps and I mapped all the churches, and it was like a big upside down U with no churches in the downtown core. And so I began to pray, God, would you raise up church planters to go downtown? This is a place I love. God, would you please send church planters to go down there? It's going to be hard. Would you? Don't ever pray that. Because, I left that church and I was really wrestling the last year, like discernment. Where is God calling me? And I thought, well, it can't be that God would call me to go to downtown. I had all the reasons why. I'm not a church planter. I'm too old. It's for other people to go. I was going to go to a seminary and teach. And then I got contacted, took a church planting assessment. I thought, well, this is going to kill it for sure. They're going to say, like, dude, cute, nice try, but no. And then I was surprised when they came back, and I was approved, which makes me question the church planting assessment. Jamie actually did make me question it afterwards. But one thing led to another. I began to realize the only reason why I wouldn't go was fear. And fear was actually very real. I was told by a church planter I respect in Toronto, it is impossible to plant a church in Liberty Village. Does everyone know where Liberty Village is? Anybody not know where Liberty Village is? It's okay if you don't. Liberty Village is a condo community north of the CNE. It didn't even exist 15 years ago, but it's condo city, millennials, 10,000. So I was told by a church planter, nobody can ever plant a church there, and especially you can't plant a church there. So he was very specific. Even if somebody could, you can't. And so that actually, because I respected the guy, made me think a little bit about, what am I smoking something I shouldn't? Is this very realistic or not? And but it became clear that God was calling us to go. The only reason not to go was fear, which we were terrified. And in 2012, we actually moved, and it was a huge adjustment to go from the burbs to all of a sudden a young, professional, millennial community where people were not interested in church. There were 4 of us, my family, basically. After a year, we dropped. My daughter's like, I'm out. So, the church plant was not going in the right direction. We attracted others, but even my daughter was like, I'm done. You can pray for her. She walked away from the faith. I think God is still writing her story, but that's not a great start to a church plant, right? We're 4 strong. Oh wait, we're 3 strong. And then from there we began to grow. It's been hard and it's been exciting. But today what I want to do is to just talk about what does it look like to make that transition from being suburban to going into the heart of the city. And so just footnote, when I say the heart of the city, Liberty Village is not downtown Toronto. I think the boundaries of downtown Toronto go to Bathurst. And so if you are a downtown Torontonian, you'll be rolling your eyes right now because you're like, Liberty Village is not downtown Toronto. But for all effects and purposes, it is I think it's part of what I would call the neighborhood fabric of more inner city Toronto. I wouldn't call it suburban. It's got suburban elements in it. It's got a big metro with a big parking lot, which drives me crazy. So it has got suburban elements within, I would say, a more urban community, if that makes sense. So are you with me so far? Any questions?
Liberty Village is downtown.
Yeah, it really is. I had a friend, we were in Willowdale, Finch, and he was talking about Yonge and Finch being downtown Toronto,
No.
and I'm like, dude,
No.
you're nowhere. You think just because you can see the CN Tower, you're in downtown Toronto. But Liberty Village is essentially downtownish. Here's a challenge of the burbs, and I want to be fair. So, is anybody suburban right now, currently suburban? Okay. So you guys hold me, I want to be fair, because I think it's one of the trends I don't like is that urban guys slag anything that's not urban. And I don't think that's a healthy trend, because I think that actually wherever there are people, it matters.
Amen.
So, I think that there's been a necessary emphasis on urban ministry. But I think that, there's actually a dire need for rural church planters right now, because everybody wants to go to the hip communities like Liberty Village. Nobody wants to go to Farmville. Some people want to go to Mississauga or whatever, but the sexy thing to do is to go downtown. But having lived in the suburbs, growing up in Brampton, and then living in Etobicoke so I've been in the suburbs most of my life. What is a suburb? Actually hard to define. But generally a mixed-use area, often primarily residential, existing either as part of a city or an urban area or as a separate residential community within commuting distance of a city. So here are some of the traits of a suburban area. Low density. So typically, where was I? Well, Sarnia in London recently. There was another place, and we were just driving around, and it's like, could they put up another plaza? Like, it's plaza after plaza. Oh yeah, it was Brantford. And it was like, everything is, like, you have to drive everywhere. Now, I said to my friend, like, where do you live? He's like, oh, we're way across town. I did a Google map, it was 7 minutes. So it's not even very far, but you can't walk from his house to go get groceries. You've got to get in the car. You've got to drive. Everything's kind of low density where, like, instead of Liberty Village where there's, I think 15,000 people within an area, like a very small area, there would be like maybe in that equivalent area, like up to 1,000 people. So much lower density. Reliance on the automobile. And that's the thing. In suburbia, it's very difficult to live without a car. You're not meant to walk, so you can do transit, but it's very hard to live. Like, I biked here. For me to drive here would be very difficult. It would be possible, but it would be like, it's actually faster for me to bike here than to drive here, and it's easier. It's geared for that. Single-family dwellings and fewer community anchors and centers. So, Ridgeview area, so again, it was like, what is the heart of this community? It's like, I don't know what the heart of the community is. Like, there's no... And please hear me, I am not saying it is bad to live in suburbia, but what I'm saying is there's a set of traits there that make ministry very different from a downtown area. And I actually read, there's a book called Finding Holy in the Suburbs, written by an acquaintance of mine, Ashley Hale. She lives in California. She talks about moving to suburbia and the difficulty she had, because it was like, I didn't want to live in suburbia. Like, it wasn't my dream. It's not the sexy thing to do. And her whole book is basically about how to do ministry in suburbia, which I think is very important. But here's what she says, and what I think I've found myself. In suburbia, what are some of the ideals? Comfort. Having your own space. So the ideal is that you can pull into your driveway, maybe even if you have a garage door opener, you can press the button and the garage door will open, you go into your garage, and from there you walk into your house. As well, the idea is, your own backyard where your kids can play. And then you bring that to church. And here's what I think generally I find with suburban churches. What are some of the things, and again, I'm not slagging them, but I pastored one of these. I think people came expecting programs. And so they come to the church saying, like, what do you have to offer me? Because there's a church down the road that has even better programs. This can happen downtown as well. But also, it's almost like, when you're in suburbia, you shop at big box stores. You go to Costco, you go to Walmart, and the same thing goes to a church. You go to a full-service church where there's like, they offer what you're looking for. And so Ashley Hales writes this, she says, we're next to each other, but we're lonely. We close our garages, behind which we pursue our own stories of self-realization. We move out into the world, not face-to-face, but in cars. Windows up, ready to consume the next activity. We emerge from our garages for neighborly gestures, but life is not lived there between neighbors. Now, I don't know. Is she being too hard on suburbs? Am I being too hard on suburbs? I actually think we need to figure out what ministry looks like. I think we actually need to figure out what it means to be missional in suburbs. We need Christians in the suburbs. But I would say that there's unique challenges in the city, which I'll get to, but there's unique challenges in the suburbs, which make ministry very difficult. So I want to pause here. Any questions, comments? And you can tell me I'm wrong if you want. So that's okay.
Do you think that condo living, it's very, very different from suburban living,
yeah.
But is it in some ways even more isolationist if you want it to be?
If you want it to be, for sure. Yeah. I was thinking about that last night. I went home, I hated last night. I was so convicted. I was really convicted when she said that always a line that you can't be present if you're too busy.
Yeah.
I went home and I said to Charlene, oh, like, I hated that. Like, it was like, God was like, listen to that. And I was thinking about her front porch and just the whole thing of like, in a condo, you can't have that front porch. So I've actually found, we'll get into this a little bit, like I found where I live, people live in 400 square feet or larger, but like the unit right next to us is a studio. So it's like one room and a bathroom. People have dogs. Many of them live alone. They're lonely. So in one sense, I've actually found it easier to make friends in where I live than I did when I lived in Etobicoke. So, but it's also easy to hide if you want to. So I find the loneliness drives people into community, but I find that if you want to, take the elevator up, don't talk to anybody, lock the door, and you can be left alone. So, yeah, for sure.
One of the things, because I do live in the, I like to say the inner suburbs of Toronto, but it's an aging part of the city. So I think probably, the trends of this growing demographic of seniors in Canada is going to be largely in smaller towns, the Brantfords, and maybe, other people will move there or whatever. But it's also going to happen a lot in Etobicoke and North York and these kinds of places in Toronto. So that's just an interesting thing about what does it look like to do ministry in the suburbs. And I think that creates quite a few opportunities just on our street. The number of people who are now actually they're not just retired, they're now becoming infirm. So there's a whole lot of sort of invitation in that towards, checking in on people and
Absolutely.
talk about loneliness and stuff like that. And that wasn't the case, 20 years ago or whatever. But now a lot of these single detached homes, no one can buy them because they're so expensive. So, and seniors don't want to leave them. So, anyway.
What's interesting? I was reading a secular source saying that people used to flee downtown. They fled it to go to the suburbs because they were trying to flee poverty. And it's interesting because now, in many places in downtown Toronto, it's actually poverty isn't there. There's pockets of downtown Toronto where there's poverty, but now you have to be very affluent. And so poverty has moved to the suburbs actually, not everywhere, because like you say, to own a home is very expensive, but if you can...
There's a lot of panhandling now, which
Yeah.
was, I know, I remember when that first started, and I thought, this is different.
Yeah. So the suburbs are changing. It used to be, that would be where you'd go to be comfortable, and downtown would... I went to Pittsburgh the other year, and it reminded me of what Toronto used to be like. At night, there's nobody on the streets. Whereas downtown Toronto now, my wife used to walk home, she used to work late, and she'd come home the odd time at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd worry about her. And she said, you don't need to worry. Queen Street's packed. There's no... It's not risky at all. There's, more people out at 2 o'clock in the morning than, 8 o'clock in the morning. It's very busy, very vibrant. So, yeah, it's interesting how it's changed. Let me talk about what I'm learning in the city. And again, please interrupt me if I I want to preface this by saying I feel like I'm very much learning. So I don't feel... I've spent most of my life in the suburbs. Trevor would know this, but I think as church planters, you never... Let me know if this is fair or not. I think the more you do it, the more you realize, I am... there's no formula. There's no, I've nailed it. I think church planters is we're R&D department, so we're really cobbling together, what is God calling us to do? How can we serve this community? And it's not like you ever, nailed it. This is... So I feel very much like I'm a student. And I would like to say this. Urban areas are very challenging. So Liberty Village is very challenging. My friend was right. Apart from the Lord, it really is impossible to plant a church there. And sometimes I'm actually perversely encouraged because I go to visit other church plants, and maybe by their social media I have this image of revival and hundreds there, and then I go to visit and I'm like, praise God. We're all, some of them are doing better, but we're all kind of limping along, right? Where none of us are, I don't think any of us would say we've cracked the formula, what it means to do effective ministry in downtown Toronto. but we're all working at it, and God is working in small ways, which I love how God does. God often works in small ways, not in big ways. But what I discovered actually moving to Liberty Village, and this I say would apply anywhere in downtown Toronto and probably many other cities, certainly New York, Montreal. I don't know about Windsor for sure. You can tell me in a minute. It's a city of neighborhoods. And what I experienced that day going up the subway at Runnymede. Okay, so my dad lived in a little village in England called Birchington. And you would go down the street, and there was like one main street. And there would be the grocer, if you said, where are you going to go for groceries? It's like, there's one, So of course, I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk, I'm going to say hi to my neighbors on the street, I'm going to walk there, get groceries, come home. What I discovered is Toronto, a lot of communities downtown are like that. So in Liberty Village, where I live, you have to leave, as we heard last night, extra time for going to the grocery store, because you're going to bump into 3 or 4 people. And that is not what I experienced in the suburbs. I never bumped into people. I would go to the grocery store and it would be like this, just like the massive population of, you didn't know anybody. I now live in a village where actually, Liberty Village actually is a village, because you continually meet people you know all the time, which means you can't get away with stuff either, right? One day my daughter and I were out for a walk. I met somebody who knew me in the community. I think she knew my wife. And for whatever reason, my daughter, who's in her 20s, was feeling affectionate that day and grabbed my hand. And so we were holding hands. I'm like, I'm not going to argue. Like, how many dads have their 20-year-old daughter want to hold their hand? And so I'm walking with her, and I see this person who sees me, and she gives me the dirtiest look. And I know why, because I'm seeing Darryl, a pastor of a church here that he's planting, out with a young woman, holding her hand, and I know it's not his wife. And so I had to think of a way. I didn't have to, but later on I messaged her and said, I should introduce my daughter. So I thought I would head that off. But that's the beauty of being in a community like that. Like, you really are in a neighborhood where people know each other, which is a very different picture of what people think of what downtown is like. And Christopher Hume, who writes in The Star about urban issues, I don't always agree with what he says, but he says this: in a city obsessed with real estate and the price of housing, the neighborhood sits at the heart of what it means to be a Torontonian. I agree with that. Like, Little Portugal, which is north of where we live, Kensington Market, Trinity Bellwoods, Queen West, Parkdale, you go on, City Place, Distillery District, Canary District, Fort York, Toronto is this interesting conglomeration of small neighborhoods where each neighborhood has its very unique identity. One of my favorite things to do is actually to explore the city of Toronto on my day off and just discover, I had no idea that there was, one day Charlene and I were walking not far from here, and she's like, I want to go to the end of the street. And I said, what could possibly be at the end of the street? Seriously. And she's like, no, just go. And we get to the end of the street, and there's this, massive bull street art, basically. And I'm like, of course there had to be something at the end of the street. You end up being right again, and I end up being wrong. But I love that. I love exploring, what is in this community? What makes this community tick? What is the center of this community? And here's anybody know Jane Jacobs? So Jane Jacobs was from New York. She fought Robert Moses there about kind of the development plans of Toronto or New York. Came to Toronto and basically wrote the book. Even though she wasn't trained as an urban specialist, she's iconic. And so Jane Jacobs came to Toronto, fought at the time the expansion of the. Remember, they were going to build a highway, the Spadina Expressway, that from the Allen Road all the way through communities down to. Basically the Gardner, and she fought that. And here's what she said: for a community to thrive, it needs to be walkable, it needs to be mixed use, where you've got stores and homes all mixed in together, and businesses. It needs to have local economies, so that I don't have to leave Liberty Village if I want to buy a bottle of wine, or if I want to buy nobody rents movies. What's a good example? If I want to do whatever, like, I don't have to leave. I can do everything in the community. And also, like, she talks about this creating a walkable community with things at street level where there's members of the neighborhood get to know each other and have regular dealings with each other. So Jane Jacobs is brilliant. Not everyone agrees with her, but basically she said certain things are needed, and if those things are present within an urban community, it thrives. It just comes alive. And that's what I found. So we were in Brantford, as I said, and I said to Charlene, like, "Oh, can you picture living here?" Charlene's my wife. And she said, "No." And we came back to Liberty Village. We were in the ugliest part of Liberty Village the other day. There are very ugly parts of Liberty Village. They haven't done a great job designing it. And she said, "I'm back. This place is alive. The streets are full of people. There's a vibrancy there." And that's what happens in a good downtown community. And here's what I would say. And I'm going to get into what I've learned in a minute about being in an urban community. But here's what I would say. Ministry in each neighborhood of Toronto should take the shape of that community. So a church in Parkdale should look very different from a church in Liberty Village, which should look very different from a church in, name the community. Like, it really should begin to identify with that particular community and really... so there are regional churches. I think Stone Church is an example of a regional church. But I think we need a lot of neighborhood churches. And it's not like either or, I think both. But I actually think we need churches that are in particular neighborhoods that begin to take the shape of that neighborhood and reach those people. So like we heard last night, the whole idea of parish, that's a power. In Toronto, I think we need to recapture that idea of parish, that we have churches that exist for the people of that community, regardless of whether they come to the church or not, that are working for the good of that community. And so we have somebody who came to our church once, I think, and she calls me the village pastor. And I always say, "Did you say village pastor or village idiot?" Because whenever somebody says he's the village, my mind automatically jumps to idiot, not pastor. So, but I love that. I love that she never, and I want her to come to church. I want her to know the Lord. She doesn't. But I love that she calls me the village pastor. I don't think there's a higher compliment. Like, that is what it's all about, to be in some sense there representing Christ in that community. So I'm going to talk about what I learned, but let's pause there. That's the whole idea of, like, one of the major differences, I think, from moving from the suburbs to moving to downtownish is the neighborhood nature. I think that suburbs generally don't have a strong sense of neighborhood as much, and counterintuitively, at least in Toronto, I'd be curious in Windsor, like, communities actually have a sense of neighborhood.
Very much.
Yeah, it's good. Any comments? Or I'd be interested if you agree, those of you that aren't in downtown areas. If, like, I just find that although there's like Clarksonville, there's Agincourt, there's like different places, there isn't that cohesive sense of like, oh, I bumped into like 3 people because I went to the grocery store, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and interestingly, in my experience in Toronto anyway, where there have been places of where there have been economic and social need, and the city has taken some initiative to identify, like back in the 2000s, I guess it was, there were these 13 communities that were identified as kind of like at risk, and the city made initiative to try to help in those communities. And that helped, actually, because it brought people together, and there were then common things that folks were working on. So I would agree. I think, but yeah, in suburban communities that are relatively okay economically are more fragmented and individualistic and anonymous to each other. And so it's just kind of interesting how the church and what kind of you have to latch onto as someone who's trying to do ministry and meet people and connect with people is influenced a lot by government decisions and Jane Jacobs' kind of city planning issues and these kinds of things. So yeah, glad that you're in a community that has all that kind of street level and mixed use, and like you said, you can't go to the grocery store without leaving time to bump into people. That's Like it's highly secular, but it's rich for relationship and connection.
Yeah, it's interesting because the city has, like, Liberty Village is a case study on not how to develop a community in a lot of ways. Like not enough parkland, no schools, no community centers, density too high, sidewalks too narrow. Like there's more dogs than children, so the parks become like a dog toilet basically. So it becomes very hard for the kids to play there because, so it's like they got a lot wrong, but still, despite that, it's almost like it's still thriving. It's almost like I don't know why, because like there's lots of reasons to hate Liberty. You can't grow grass in Liberty Village. By grass, I mean like not marijuana. I mean grass, right? Because the dogs pee on it, and so like they keep planting grass, and it's like, I don't know. So they made a lot of mistakes, but it still works somehow. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of see where my experiences fit in. I don't think, like Midland, you did know people, right? And you did run into people but that's more of like, that's 16,000 people, that's maybe not even a suburb, but kind of. And then here, you mentioned it already, like Stone Church is kind of both. So, we've definitely made some ground to be more of a community church, but we still kind of get those hardships of the distant suburban people coming in and not wanting to come during the week or not wanting to invest, and it's really hard to find volunteers because a lot of people commute in. And so, like it's just kind of a weird thing. And even for me, I was convicted last night too. Just like my living situation is I'm 80% of my life is here, and then 20% like I'm sleeping, so I'm not developing community where I live, and I'm more of the shut my doors and sleep and eat. So I just trying to process all of that. And
even in commuting, like one thing I remember from Richview is people saying, if I want to invite somebody to church, I probably won't invite them here because it's so far away.
Sure.
Like I'll drive, but
yeah.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, and where I live, it's about 20 minutes here, so it's not too bad, just because I'm right next to DVP here and then here. So on a good day, on a Sunday morning, it's about 20 minutes, even less than. On a work week, it's about 45.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's just that weird. And I desire to live closer, but it would just be pretty next. Like my rent is already half my salary, so it would be even more of that if I came to this area.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's tricky.
Yeah. Let me tell you what I've learned, and I'm still learning. Like I feel like, last night was like a dagger to the heart in so many ways. I'm like, yes, thank you for reminding me. I need to. But here's what I'm learning. First is this, like, gotta learn the neighborhood. So I came in, and I'm continually doing this. So this sounds like but like I spent 20 years not pastoring in the city, pastoring in a suburban context, in a traditional church. And to move to a downtown community of people who are younger than me and plant a church, which is very different from like pastoring an established church. One of the things I'm continually trying to figure out is how do I not just import what I think I know into this situation? I've got to relearn, almost like rethink everything. And even the neighborhood especially, to understand what makes Liberty Village tick. What is different about this community where I actually have to know this culture? So somebody wrote this: every island in a city has developed its own culture. Suburbs are like a standard mall. They all look the same once you are inside them. Urban neighborhoods are more like local shops that all have their unique flavor. I'm always struck when I go to the States that I could be in a mall in I was in a mall in Orlando last year. And it's not that different from Square One, Mississauga. Like it feels kind of the same. But neighborhoods just have if I go to Kensington Market, you're in Kensington Market, right? Like it's not like anywhere else. It's very eclectic. And I think knowing like what makes this community different, which changes actually over time too. So like just learn the neighborhood. In church planning, I don't know if you use this term a lot, but they talk about year zero. So I'm a very like ambitious person in terms of like, I tend to skip preparation. I don't, that's saying too far. I like to get things done, right? I'm very impatient if I'm not getting things done. One of the hardest things to do in church planting is actually to stop doing and start listening and learning. Like, just put a break. For me, it's hard. Put the brakes on doing. The other thing, I remember Tim Keller saying, a lot of preachers are very good at speaking and really bad at listening. And they go into a community and they're like, we're here, let me tell you. And it's like, how do you stop and listen and learn about people in the community? So, yeah, learn. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? But I really think it actually is important to learn the identity of the community, to just begin to exegete the community. I'll give you one more point and then we'll break. I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 points. So I'll give you one more and then we'll take a break. The other thing I'm learning in urban context is expect things to take longer. So it is slower in an inner city context. So the other day I said to somebody who supports us financially, thank you for hanging in there with us. We're approaching our 6th anniversary as a church plant. It used to be that the model would be you got 3 years and then like, you know, you should be up and going. Like you should have everything going now. And what I'm finding, and I've heard this from urban church planters, you can do that still today if your ministry plan is basically sucking Christians from other churches to join you who are good givers. But if you're going to grow a church that is part of the fabric of the neighborhood, and if you're going to reach people who are not already believers, you're looking at probably, in some cases, 6, 7 years. And I've even heard people say, even in affluent areas, it might be that it's difficult for them ever to be fully sustainable because of the costs. Now, given that there are different models that bring down the cost, bivocational, I think, should be on the table. Different options in terms of getting space and all that. But generally, in an urban area, it's going to take much longer than in a suburban setting. You've got to take time to exegete the culture. You've got to be a student of the culture. And you've got to also realize that within the city, we're going to look at this, some of the factors, but like the transients, the cost, the nature of the people who live there, it might take longer to see the same results in an inner city or a city as it would in the suburbs. So that's anecdotal, but I think it's true. That's been my experience for sure. So let's pause there. I got 6 more, but does that ring true so far? Any comments? I can keep going, but
One of the things I found coming from, into urban ministry, our church is very focused on poverty issues and marginalized people, and I had to rethink the paradigm of discipleship, because church is really good at making discipleship sequential and educational. And discipleship with people that are not sequential and educational has to be more cyclical and almost adapting as you go, living with them in ways that has a deeper effect than them just sort of processing all the information.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious about in Liberty Village. So what would be the obstacles, the barriers that prevent the gospel saturating in people's lives?
So Liberty Village, one of the things would be people there live very good lives. And I think it's very tempting to say that they're rich. They're actually not rich. To live in Liberty Village, a lot of condos cost $3,000 a month or up. Or to buy, my neighbor's selling her condo, and it's in the 900s to buy. So you're not buying a detached home, you're buying a condo My maintenance fees are $800 or $900 a month. Yeah, 800 and like creeping up to $900 a month. So, like, to live there takes a lot of money. So, and then people, it's fascinating. The guy who owned my condo before me, he lived there 2 years. I think he used his oven twice. So when we bought it, we had a brand new oven, and he's like, "You've lived here 2 years." He eats out all the time. So people in our community, like, they're used to, like, I have a nice place, I have a good job, I can eat out and drink, like, go for drinks every night. There's a concert on, like, I don't know, like, a neighbor across the hallway, if there's a Raptors championship game or a big name concert, he's there. Like, I don't know where he gets his money from, but he's at every... So I think, honestly, the good life is a major barrier where we are. Like, people just have no need of God. The other area, and we're confronting this now, is we believe, I hope all of us believe some very strange things. Like, and so I'll give you an example. Like, Jesus was born of a virgin. Jesus rose physically and bodily from the dead. And just even, like, for people who haven't grown up in Christianity, they're like, "Come again? Like, what do you believe exactly?" And they believe, like, I remember one lady that said her father died, and she knows that her father comes to visit her because one day she found a toothpick under her pillow, and she doesn't even have toothpicks in her house. And so for her, it was like, that's a sign that, like, people believe weird things, but within the church to say we believe, like, we're preaching on sexuality right now, to say that we believe some of the things we believe about sexuality, people are like, in Liberty Village, it's like, really? Like, you, seriously? So I think there's not a lot of hunger for God. I think, actually, I wish there was more. I have to be careful when I say this. Like, I actually think hostility is better than indifference. And it's not like I want hostility, but I think sometimes people are just, like, so indifferent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's just like affluence, basically. Yeah.
Did you speak a little bit about space and
Yeah.
did I miss that already? Or?
No, it's coming, but I'll speak about it now. So we rented a dance studio. We could only get it for a few hours a week. We paid quite a bit for it. And then one day, we have all our stuff stored there. One day I was out of town, and I got a phone call saying that she had broken the lease. So we better come get our thing, because once you break the lease, like if you sign a 5-year lease and you inform your landlord that you're breaking it, they can come immediately and change the locks. So she phones me and says, "Just so you know, I've broken the lease. Like, we don't know, the landlord could be here later today and basically, like, change the locks, and all your sound equipment, like $10,000 worth of stuff, could be gone. Because at that point, the landlord can seize everything that's in there." So we lost that space, and we began to look for new space. Where we are, that was the good old days of Liberty Village. That was 4 years ago. There was still stuff available. And so it took a lot of work. Oh, my coworker at the time, Nathan, said, "Oh, this is exciting. I can't wait to see what God will do." And I wanted to deck him because I believed that he was right, but he wasn't worried. Like, it was my job to find a new space. He was just like, "Oh, this is so good. I'm going home to have dinner with my wife. Good luck." Right? Like, so I was like, So we looked for a new space. We found a place, storefront, and basically the landlord said, "You got 6 months before we redevelop." The restaurant that was there before was paying double what we're paying now. But it's like, you can have it because it's only going to be yours for 6 months. And 4 years later, we're still there. We think we have another year. We're looking for new space. There's nothing. So, and since then, that was 4 years ago, every property has been bought by developers. And now they're renting to, like, we were trying to rent this place. And the agent said, "Well, it's either you or, like, I forget, Winners or like some, it's like, I don't think you have a chance." So, yeah, space is a huge issue. There's no schools, no churches, and we're committed to staying in Liberty Village. So it's like, we're here, we're not leaving. I don't know what God's going to do, but... So last time we lost our space, it took 2 weeks. They wouldn't call me back. It's like, the space was available. They said they were interested. And I remember one night, we actually called a prayer meeting to pray about it. And so we're praying about this, and it was in the middle of that prayer meeting that she finally sent the email saying the space was ours. So I love how God works, right? It's like he waits till we're like, we keep trying and pushing down the doors, and it's only in the middle of prayer that God's like, okay.
How does the no schools thing affect your demographics and then like your youth? So I'm the student ministries pastor here, so I'm just interested, like, do you guys have a youth group, and how big is it?
We have no youth.
Okay.
My son was attending. He's now 20.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think there's any teenagers in the neighborhood.
Right. Yeah.
There's babies, and then typically, I don't think I see many children above about age 3 or 4.
Is it young professionals and then they're moving out if they get married, or is it older?
No, actually there are some older. The typical would be in their 30s.
Okay.
And because people delay marriage now,
Right.
Typically people are into their 30s before they have a kid, and then it's heartbreaking. We had somebody who had 2 kids and came to me and said, "I hate leaving church. This is my church. I love this church.
Yeah.
You'll never have kids here, and for the sake of my kids, I need to go to a church that does." And I was like, "You're right, but
That's hard.
yeah, it's hard because you're trying to build like you need kids to get other kids, right?
Yeah.
And then when people leave, oh, it's so hard." You had your hand up, or you're just stretching?
I'm just rubbing my. It helps me think.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
It sounds like there's an intrinsic barrenness to Liberty Village.
Yeah,
Because if you start to have children, you no longer fit there.
yeah. Well, and the other thing I'm wrestling with right now is that how do you? So I believe in singleness. Like I'm preaching this week, actually. Like singleness is not second class.
Right.
However, when all your people are single,
Yeah.
like when singleness is the norm,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm thinking through what does ministry look like in that context. So,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. Like when you're in a community that has very little marriage and very few children,
Mm-hmm.
like what does that look like long term for the community? Does that create a healthy community or?
Well, yeah, I think that's common in a lot of condo communities.
It is.
Once you have 2 babies, you're headed for Curtis or Bowmanville on this side, or
Yeah.
and so that was a challenge.
But it's interesting because I met with Olivia Chow when she used to be our MP, and she said, in Hong Kong, in a like 800 square foot condo, say, like you'd have 6 kids,
Wow.
or like she's like there's something about the North American like
Yeah.
standard that's very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're not gonna. I don't think you can change that.
We're not at the heart communal.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I was so challenged with last night, right? Like, how do you build that sense of community, and like, how do you like? Could we leave our condo door open? And yeah, it's very interesting. David Fitch said this. David Fitch is a church planter, actually born in Canada, from Hamilton. Forgive him, he likes the Ticats, but and then he moved to Chicago. He's a professor there and also a church planter, and but not your normal church planter. And this is what his advice is, and I think it's an important lesson for ministry to the city. He says, commit to this place for 10 years. And he says, basically, he's not a big fan of sending like what we did, send a couple in, good luck, but send 3 couples in and have them all commit to 10 years. And he says if you do that, there'll be a fresh expression of the gospel in that community until the kingdom is consummated in Christ's return. And what he's basically saying is 2 things there. It's going to take more than one person. It's going to take probably, like he recommends, 3 couples. And it's going to take like 10 years. You're going to feel like quitting. But if you're going to move into a downtown area, don't expect to go there for 2 or 3 years and see things happen very quickly. And I really believe he's right. Like, so one of the reasons we brought Nathan in, and Nathan's no longer with us, Nathan, is very quickly I realized we can't do this by ourselves. Like we're building a core team, but we'll get too discouraged. We'll feel too alone. The obstacles will be too great. Now, bringing somebody in, then you all of a sudden you have the problems of how do you work with this other person, right? You have all the other, like you introduce a whole new set of problems, but you're not alone anymore. And that was really valuable for us. So, I think just you've got to lengthen the timeline. And it's almost like you've got to strap yourself to the mast and say, I'm not going to call it quits until 10 years have passed. And then use different metrics. I was talking with somebody this morning about this. We feel good, at least I do, when there's a big crowd out. We love that, right? So it's funny, I speak at a lot of churches. It's not even my church, and I feel really good if I go to a church and it's packed out. It's good for the ego. And again, why does that matter, right? Does Jesus measure success by that? And so within church planting, especially in a city, one of my church planter friends in London gave me advice one day in London, England. And he said, I've learned two rules about church planting that I follow pretty carefully now. Stop counting and have fun. Is that the best advice in the world? I don't know if it is. But I actually think there's a bit of wisdom there. On Sundays, I used to look out the window and see where's so-and-so, are they coming today? And it really helped me to, instead of counting the people who weren't there or counting the paltry numbers that were there some days, these people are here. Minister to them. Have fun. Don't let the people who are not there rob your joy. So that whole thing of what metrics look like success in your context. Maybe in an urban context, because it's not going to be probably huge numbers right away. Maybe it looks like getting to know your neighbors. Maybe it looks like having opportunities to share the gospel or have gospel conversations. Maybe it looks like, what happened to me is somebody who had no interest in the church that I met at a board game group calling me and saying, can we meet because I have cancer? And I just need to talk to somebody now. And I know you're a pastor. I want to talk to you. So, I was at a church where we had hundreds of people. And to go from that to a church in a downtown area where we had nobody, how do you measure success? Especially when the growth isn't as rapid as you hoped it would be. I've just got a few more and then I'll open it up. But another thing I'd say is this true in Windsor? It's a very transient environment. Cities seem to be places where people come and go very quickly. Is that true where you are?
Yes and no. I mean, I think Windsor tends to be more of an industrial city, so people tend to stick it out longer. But in 25 years, I've probably had 5 different congregations. Yeah. So I don't need to move, they do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. In Liberty Village, I was shocked because when I moved there, I didn't know the area very well. And the guy that told me I could never plant a church there, he said, is it a very transient area? And I was like, wow. And then that question had never occurred to me before. I hadn't even moved there yet. But I was like, I don't know. And it turns out that 70% of the people in Liberty Village move every 2 years. So, that's one of the things that's kept us small, is that this has been born true within our church. People come, maybe they become Christian, I baptized 3 people. The next week, 2 of them were gone. One moved to London, England, and I forget where the other one moved, but it wasn't like they just took off. It's we've had in 6 years, I think we've had probably about 4 different congregations. So, the transience is the real issue. It's almost like a college ministry, and you can't fight it. So you can't go you guys need. You can, but one guy I read said he just came to see his ministry in a setting like that as almost being the water people in a marathon. It's people are passing through. I can mourn the fact that they're passing through, but why don't I just get used to playing my role while they're passing through and trying to be as effective as I can while they're there. So, so it's hard, but I hate that it takes 3 years. Dan McDonald says it takes 3 years to reach somebody for Christ in Toronto, and this is a miracle. It can happen like that. But he says typically from first contact or first exploration to commitment to Christ, 3 years. Well, how do you do that in a church or a community context where people move every 2 years? It's really hard, but that's what it is. Yeah, two more things and then a conclusion, and then we'll just open it up. So I lived in Etobicoke, Park Lawn and Queensway. Liberty Village is, with good traffic, 10 minutes away by car. And when the first year, my family wasn't ready to move to Liberty Village, so I would commute in and hang out in the coffee shop. I'd meet with people. And then people would say, "Where do you live?" And I would say, "Oh, in Etobicoke, not far away." And it was almost like, you know, the limos where they have the drivers up front and like, you could almost see that, like, you could almost see them reach for the thing. It's like the wall's up, like, I'm done with you. And what I discovered, and we knew this right from the beginning, was always our plan to move into the community. But in urban ministry, presence matters. At Ridgeview, I live 9 kilometers away, 50-minute drive, nobody cared, really. But where I'm ministering now, you have to be part of the community. You just have to be. And that's part of, I think, urban ministry, generally speaking. It actually matters. I know one person, a church planter, planting in an impoverished area in eastern Scarborough, off Kingston Road. He lives up north of Newmarket. And it's like, dude, like, you can't plant in an urban, impoverished community and then live an hour away. Like, so presence actually matters. Being part of the community matters. Being part of community events matters so that people get to know you. So somebody said to me, you guys always show up. Like, you guys are always there. You're part of this community. And that counts for a lot, knowing that people see us like, we know you're here. We know you're not just driving in. We know that you're part of this community. And then we're just getting pulled out. So we're right now facing the temptation, like, why don't you consider moving out of Liberty Village? Like, there's no space there. And we've just, right in our values at the beginning, said we are committed to Liberty Village. Personally speaking, I felt, I don't get discouraged a lot, but there have been maybe 3 times where I'm like, I'm done. This is too hard. Resist getting pulled out. Like, just say, it's no matter how hard it's going to be, I'm going to stick with these people. I'm going to be here as long as it takes. If the Lord removes me, that's different. But it won't be because it gets too hard. And my conclusion is this, and we'll open for discussion. We've largely figured out ministry in the suburbs. We're really good at ministry in the suburbs. We need more Christians to make long-term commitments to be good neighbors and also to be part of a good ministry in the city. We don't have, there's whole neighborhoods of Toronto where there's no good churches, and there's a dearth of even Christians living there saying, we're committed to this place, to be good neighbors, to be hospitable, to welcome them into our homes, to pursue the peace of the city. And somebody said this applies wherever you are, suburbs or rural area or downtown, but I believe it. Ultimately, healthy communities will only be realized when individuals commit to a particular place and to be particular neighbors in the long-term work of making a place, of recognizing and enjoying the responsibilities and pleasures of membership in a local community. So I don't even care if you're downtown or not, or commit to a community and just say, I'm committed to making this neighborhood, I'm committed to loving people, like, I'm here, and I want God to use me to bless this community over a long period of time. I think if more Christians did that, we would begin to see Toronto be radically transformed, and Windsor radically transformed, and Scarborough, wherever we are. So that would be my challenge for all of us. Commit to a place, love the neighborhood, commit to ministry there over a long period of time, ask God to use you, and I think that in small ways, but significant ways, He will. So that's all I got. So questions? I think we got 10 minutes. Or discussion. You can argue with me, too.
Darryl, I'm curious, Darryl, that, tribalism, of, the limousine window going up because, you're not living in the neighborhood. I mean, you are now, but when that was happening, contrast that with the fact that the average person is only there for 2 years.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
So what's really going on when people say, I can dismiss you because I'm proud of where I am and I'm looking for people that are aligned with that somehow? What's going on? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I might need your help with that, actually. I think so. Despite people only living there a short period, I really think there is a strong sense of community identity. So, but I don't know why that wouldn't make sense because people are transient, but it exists somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. Unless, I don't know if you have ideas, any of you. But actually, you know Liberty Village, or Trevor, you know Liberty Village a bit. I don't know if you
Well, I
can
was just going to make a comment about Toronto generally. You know, we have said for a long time it's a city of neighborhoods, and for people who live in the suburbs, we still think that way. So I live on the border between North York and Scarborough, and it matters which side of that Victoria Park you're on. So yeah, I think, you know, in the absence of maybe better things to make your identity of, or to attach your sense of worth to. Yeah, there's a strong culture in Toronto to identify with your place, which is good as far as it goes. But you know, if people are not willing to talk to you because you don't come from there, then obviously it's become too much of a thing.
And I also think that, like, if you say you're from Etobicoke, like, did anybody ever watch Corner Gas? They said the name of the neighboring town, and they always go, like,
Yeah.
It's almost like that, like Etobicoke, like
It's almost
it's
like
a snobbishness.
It's almost like gang behavior
Yeah.
without the criminality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And how, you know, in the gospel work, you know, the work of the kingdom, do we bring people to that place of saying, it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter where you're from.
the cool thing now is they've opened a respite center in Liberty Village, so you have homeless people. They're building a bridge, so the railway kind of kept people out of, like,
Yeah.
Parkdale people out of Liberty Village. And now it's like we're actually building bridges across into different neighborhoods. So it's interesting to see it change, because it used to be almost like it was hard to get into Liberty Village, hard to leave. So it was almost like we're like a walled little gated community. And now it's opening up. So it's very different. And it's painful because people are, like, they're struggling. Like, now there's needles in the parking lot, right?
Yeah.
Now there's homeless people, and
Yeah.
they don't know what to do about that.
Yeah. Mm.
Just in your experience with church planning, I mean, on one hand, we see the importance of moving into the neighborhood, but yet we see you need a significant amount of
Yeah.
worth to do that. So almost we're saying church planning is for those of affluence that can afford it, right? And so, you know, a lot of times in urban ministry settings, there's this, I live in my neighborhood and you don't kind of thing, right? And so that's a challenge that I come up with all the time. You know, somebody that spends 60 hours a week in Regent Park and is seeing growth, but you're always kind of, well, you don't live there, so you're not really committed for the long haul, or you're not really making an impact. And you're always having to kind of defend yourself for that. But the reality is, like, I don't have $1 million to buy a townhouse, right? So it's like, you know, sometimes you just kind of have to,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, God's called me here, we're seeing
Yeah.
fruit, we're seeing lives changed, and I just kind of have a stiff upper lip and deal with the church planning snobbery sometimes, right? But
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, so like, how do other movements provide someone $1 million to not have their family live in, you know, family of 5 live in one studio, right?
So that's a very valid point. Like, the guy that I knew that moved north of Newmarket, it wasn't because he couldn't afford to live in that area, but it was because, like, I don't want to live there. I don't want to live with those people. But I think, yeah, like, one of the things of figuring out the economics of How do you plant in a very expensive area? So, yeah, like, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think the cost structure is a huge issue, bivocational. But, you know, it's easier to go from, like, I've talked recently to an airline pilot that only flies, like, and he's thinking of becoming a full-time church planter. A firefighter, he only would have to miss one Sunday out of, like, every 5, and he would know well in advance. Like, it's much easier to go that way from there into ministry than for somebody like me who's been a pastor to move into, like, a second career. But, like, Ed Stetzer and those guys would say in urban, they're just beginning to think about, like, we need radically new models of ministry that, because within cities, the suburban model of full-time pastor, like, permanent facility and all that, that's getting harder in all the cities. So, yeah, I don't know that we figured that out yet, but it's a good point. I feel very guilty. Like, I make more money than I should for the size of the church we have, but the reason that I do, it's not like, and we don't have any extra money. Like, we're scraping by every month, but it's just because living where I do costs that much money. So it's hard.
You can't compare yourself
No.
to somebody in another place.
Right.
And you may make what feels like an obscene amount of money for what you do, but you're also paying to live where you are.
Yeah, and it's hard. Like,
Yeah.
if you read what you need to make to live in a place like Liberty Village, and it's a lot of money. So how do you minister in a place like that? It's very difficult. Yeah. Or Regent Park even, right? It's, yeah.
I think the issue though also becomes and each person would be different, but I think for some pastors, it's just, there is a lot of added, you talked about sort of 20% of your week is spent eating and sleeping at Warden and Lawrence, and 80% of your week is here. That's tough. So there's a price there that, you know, so it'd be interesting to have more conversation. Like you mentioned the guys in the U.S. who are talking about, like, what are the models of ministry that might make it possible? And maybe it is more, you know, like communal living. What would it look like to share ownership of something that no one family could possibly afford? And could there be maybe even, like, you know, maybe would be some Christian foundations. My goodness, the amount of money that's, you know, sitting in investments inside charitable foundations that, like, could somebody get excited about, hey, this would be a strategic thing that isn't about being able to sort of brag that you're in the community, but like to have like that would integrate life a lot in some really great ways.
And I think, like, just, you know, how I've been able to reconcile, and I think with you too, is just like, you know, we understand that we got to just spend more time here, right? And that's what I do now, right? Like you know, I go above and beyond the 40 hours a week just to be more present here, because I know that I'm, you know, sleeping, you know, further away, and that's just kind of how I've been able to.
It's funny, you know, it was back in the whatever decade it was, all these churches had manses.
Right.
And then everybody ditched those.
Yeah.
It's actually an issue within not just like downtown Toronto, but for that very issue, like most churches in even Scarborough or Etobicoke or Mississauga now, a lot of people are saying, I could come there and make the same salary, or I could move to Midland.
Yep.
And like, which one am I going to choose? Like, so that just financially.
Number of churches in the inner suburbs whose pastors can't afford to live anywhere near the church building.
Yeah.
That's typical, I think.
So one day I was at a Faith Tech event, and I wish this shows I wasn't thinking, but I met a guy, and he's like, I think his theory is in Toronto, a quarter of the wealth of Toronto is in kingdom hands, and they just can't find good things to invest it in. And if I were smart, I would have said, can I have your card? Because I want to follow up with this conversation. I never did. But that got me thinking, like, I don't think there's a lack of money in the kingdom, but I think that probably we need to think strategically about, like, what are some models that are more compelling than maybe what we have right now, where people are like, yeah, I'll invest in that. So I think the money's there, but probably we need to think of new models and new approaches. So, and we're in the middle of doing that right now, right? Like, we're losing our space, so we're thinking through some creative new possibilities, but it's not easy, that's for sure.
And there you have it, Darryl Dash from Liberty Grace Church in Toronto. You can find out more about Darryl or reach out to him at his church website, libertygrace.ca, or you can check out his own website, dashhouse.com. Now that's a dash house with 2 H's. He's also the author of a book, How to Grow, Applying the Gospel to All of Life. Darryl's also the co-founder of Gospel for Life and director of Advanced Church Planting Institute. He has a Doctor of Ministry degree from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and he's had over 25 years of ministry experience. Quite a good guy to listen to. Well, the next episode we're coming back, and we're going to go to Surrey, BC. We're going to meet Mike Brownlee from Metro Kids. Mike and his wife are part of a team that works with at-risk urban kids in a city surrounded by so much beauty and grandeur, and yet the challenges of the urban core. We want to bring you 2 episodes every month, and if you want to contact me, you can find contact information on our website, Sidewalk Skyline Podcast, or on Facebook or Twitter. I would love to hear what you're thinking and give us some feedback. What do you like? What do you have questions about? Until next time, keep one ear to God and the other ear to the ground in your city. I'm Kevin Rogers, and this is Sidewalk Skyline.